There are 4 techniques that you need to know when working with ink. One of them is hatching, another one is cross-hatching, stippling, and something we call scumbling, which is kind of making a crazy pattern all over. Now when you open up your bottle of ink, you might find that the ink has dried around the top edge of it, as you can see right here. What that split does is it allows the ink to flow down onto your paper. So when you take it and you gently press it on your paper, imagine my fingers are like the pen, they'll slowly split apart and the ink will flow on through. Now if you press down too hard, what ends up happening, splitting it apart, and then it doesn't work very well. You want to hold the pen so that you're always pulling towards yourself. Never push away from yourself. If you push away, you could splatter the paint. Or take your ink pen and see how long of a line you can make. Now you'll notice that it started out rather thick, and as I went along it got thinner. That's because it ran out of ink. So that would be when I would come back and I would refill. Now why is this important to know? Well, let's say you're trying to do an area where you want the lines to be lighter, you refill your pen, you go back into work in there, and then suddenly you have these very thick dark lines and you're like going, I didn't want that. So one of the things that I find is very beneficial is to work around my drawing. So say I want my dark lines here, I might work with this at first up over here, and then when I notice that it's starting to get a little thinner, I'll work over here. The other thing is, if you press, barely put any pressure on it, the ink is still going to flow out of your pen. And you actually get a more interesting line because you kind of end up skipping a little bit as you work with the ink. Now the ink will go further when you do this because you're not putting as much down onto the paper, which is really kind of nice. So this technique right here that I'm doing, where I'm using all the lines in the same direction, is called hatching. The next technique that I'm going to do is called cross-hatching, and I'm just going to start here because I have a lot of ink in my pen and I don't want it to blurb out. Cross-hatching, you go in the opposite direction. So I might go diagonal, I might go horizontal to my vertical lines. So as I'm filling these in, I'm still trying to keep some of the white space showing so that you can see the texture of the lines that are there. And that's what gives it a visual interest. Now, as always, when you are cross-hatching, one of the things that you want to do is use vertical lines for straight objects and curved lines for curved object. If you don't curve the lines, you won't get that sense of roundness that you need when you're creating a round object. Hatching lines don't need to be completely separated. They can run over each other and touch each other. They would still be considered hatching because in most of the cases you're still going in the same direction. Okay, the next technique that you'll do is called stippling. And stippling is interesting because it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, but essentially you're creating small, tiny dots with the pen. I should never be able to hear the pen making a noise on the paper. That means that you're doing this too hard and you're really not following the technique or using the technique very well. So you would stipple. You want an area to be darker. You might have more dots that are closer together. And you want an area to be lighter, you will have less dots and or space them out as you go. Or remember, as the pen works and the ink flows off of it, you'll get smaller and smaller dots. So that can affect it as well. When you stipple, you never are going to put an outline around your piece. You are just going to, use your pencil lines as a guide to where to put the dots and create a design. As a matter of fact, whenever you work in ink, you never want to outline because it flattens the image. All right, and then the last one is called scumbling. This isn't a technique that you'll ever really see in a, art history book or a museum book, but it is a technique that I find very helpful, and I kind of enjoy it. Essentially, with this technique, I just do like overlapping figure eights. Some people keep it real regular. Some people go like this and give it like I like to think of this as when I ink and I've had too much caffeine. But it's kind of a fun, crazy, all over pattern or design. And you can get areas that are visually interesting to look at. Because remember how we always talk about quality of line being important in the work that we do. Now, my pen, the ink is only going up to about here. So that means that there's probably about a half of an inch of ink inside of that ink bottle, which is great because you don't want to get it all the way up in here. You never want to get ink up inside of there, and you will see that you will get ink on your hands, and then that can become somewhat messy. So your assignment for today is to create a value scale in ink using the 4 different techniques. So you'll create one with hatching, you'll create one with cross hatching, one with stippling, and one with scumbling. Now, in order to save some time, these value scales do not need to be very long. So you can use this long piece of paper right here, and if you want to do, you can just divide it into 4s, and then you can do one in each. Think about making them about the length of a stick of gum, not like Trident, but Juicy Fruit. And also make sure that you label the technique. Like dip your brush or your pen nib off before you start onto the paper. So with hatching, I might start over here and I might just do tiny little lines like this and go darker and darker and closer together. You want to have a slow gradation of value going from light to dark as you work on this value scale. Here I might start to separate them out a little bit more and go further and further and further apart to create that. And I'm also was trying to get most of the ink out of my pen down here on the darker end so that I could create that sense. Sometimes you might find that when you're inking it in, it will almost become, because that's the easiest way to lay it in there and to get all that solid look in there. So what I do once I'm done is I take a look at it, I squint at it. Doing cross hatching, well, I would come across like this and probably just start with doing my little hatch marks. Would come back and I would cross hatch. My pen has a little bit too much ink in it, so what I did here is I just took a paper towel and I soaked it in the rubbing alcohol, and I put it inside a Ziploc bag that I seal, because if I do not, what happens is the alcohol evaporates. You don't have to get it perfectly clean, but you do want to remove most of the ink off of there so that it is out of the way as you're getting ready to go do your next thing. Never wash your ink pen in water or even run it underwater, because what will happen is the water will get up inside of there, combine with some of the leftover ink, and when you least expect it, a big giant blob of water will come out and blob down onto your paper.